Now for today's program. Fania Oz-Salzberger is an Israeli historian, essayist, and activist who has worked for decades for Israeli-Palestinian peace. She is professor emerita of history at the University of Haifa and author of numerous books and articles, including Jews and Words, co-authored with her father, Amos Oz. Fania is a regular columnist for Moment magazine. Joining Fania today is Sarah Breger, Moment magazine's editor and director of Moment's Daniel Pearl Investigative Journalism Initiative. Please welcome Fania Oz-Salzberger and Sarah Breger.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you for putting this together, and thank you, Fania, for speaking with us. I think the last time you spoke with us as in Moment was in November, and so much has changed, but also so much has kind of stayed the same in a way. Things seem a little frozen in time sometimes. In Moment's new issue, you wrote a really remarkable essay, A Quick Guide to Zionism in Hard Times, and Why, Despite Everything, I'm a Humanist Zionist. I hope we can put that in the chat so people can read it. But I'm hoping we could start today with maybe a basic question, but a definitional one. What is Zionism?
So hello to everyone. I'm glad to be here again. Times are not easy, and therefore I wrote the guide to Zionism in hard times. And the first thing to say and to tell everyone who asks you is that Zionism is merely a wish and its fulfillment of the Jewish people to live in their own national homeland. That's all. Nothing about the sea to the river, nothing about driving out the Palestinians, nothing about the kind of regime, although almost all the founding fathers and mothers of Zionism were liberal Democrats, and nothing about the shape of the border of the future state of the Jews. It's simply about the right of the Jewish people to a state of our own.
And thank you. And in your piece, you say you are a humanist Zionist, which maybe is a term that you coined. But what does that mean?
So, there are all kinds of Zionism running around. There have been since the very beginning. We had socialist Zionism, very predominant, people who want some kind of a future, magical, utopian society in the new land of the Jews. We had liberal Zionism, the mainstream, including, of course, Herzl, the great founding father. We had national Zionism. National could also be liberal. This is Ben Gurion. And we are now having an increase in illiberal national Zionism, which veers towards what I would call extreme nationalism, and sometimes racism, and sometimes messianism. Now, they were all a little bit messianic, but most of the Zionists took the messianic element to be a metaphor, a grand scheme of history bringing the Jews back home. But the messianics we have now have slightly different ideas. So among these Zionisms, and I have to add that we in Israel are not letting go of our Zionism, even if it's becoming a kind of a swear word in the world, a bad word. Moreover, Zionism is used as a kind of an alibi to be anti-Semitic. I'm not against the Jews, I'm against the Zionists. We all know that. We in Israel are not letting go of our Zionism, of our belief that Israel has the right to exist. But for me, it all depends on what kind of Zionist are you. Because if I had to choose between ultra-nationalism and leaving off my Zionist dream or leaving Israel, I would choose leaving Israel. It's not at any price. My kind of Zionism, which used to be the mainstream Zionism, is center-left in the terms of being liberal democratic, rule of law, member of the global community of nations, attending to the individual and not only to the collective or to some grand mystical theme. And the left element in the left of center. I was born and raised in a kibbutz. So it's not that I want to turn Israel into a kibbutz. I've left the kibbutz I grew up in, but I do want there to be social solidarity, social care, social welfare for the majority of people, for all of the people. And this is not a social democrat idea only, it is a very ancient Jewish idea. I've written a lot about it. But the bottom line is that my Zionism is moderate, that my Zionism is humanist, because we consider history to be made by human beings, not by divine interventions. We are self-made in this respect, we Israelis. We have created or invented ourselves. And humanist in the sense of caring for every living soul, whether it is a Jew or a Christian or an innocent Gazan living right now under fire. So this is Zionist humanism or humanist Zionism. It is completely logical and well within the historical frame of what Zionism has been all about.
And where do Arabs fit into, especially Arab citizens of Israel, fit into that framework?
I'll just take a sip of my coffee. I always use the yellow mug in order to remember our hostages. Everything is yellow around here now, ribbons and signs and so on.
Oh, wow.
So there are Arab or Palestinian Israelis who consider themselves either Zionist themselves, there are a few, not that many, or Zionist friendly in the sense that they say we can live with it. We can live as a minority in the national nation state of the Jews, which is also provided that it is also a liberal democracy. And some of us will serve in the army. The whole Druze community, as many of you may know, is serving in the army, and their sons are fighting in Gaza, the Bedouins, and some Christians and Muslims as well. But many of them are saying we are not part of the army. We have a big issue with the fact that Israelis and our Palestinian brethren are fighting, are inimical. But we are willing to live in a liberal democratic state, hoping that there would be eventually a territorial solution and peace. So the Israeli Arabs, or as many of the younger ones prefer to call themselves Israeli Palestinians, which is fine, because Palestinian is a proud ethnic tag that people, identity that people choose, can live and are sometimes perhaps happy to live in the country, in Israel, with a Jewish majority, to represent Israel in the world, in sports, in arts, and so on. Some of them, especially these days, are more radicalized, of course, and they are angry with the Jews, and I can understand it, because the Jews are fighting their Gazan brethren and occupying the West Bank, and because recent legislation has not been friendly to the Israeli-Palestinian citizens. A previous Likud government, we've had quite a few now, a previous one, about 6 or 7 years ago, legislated the basic law of the nation, it's called, a basic law, constitutional standing, which in so many words put Jews above the others in terms of what this nation state is above. And this created quite a deep rift. And I hope that Israel would be able, under future leadership, to shift towards a formula which is more like the original formula that Herzl gave. Complete civic equality to Jews and Arabs in the state of the Jews, the nation state of the Jews. He didn't call it a Jewish state. He said the state of the Jews, meaning a people made of individuals whose identity is Jewish and who belong here. So if we manage to steer back to this middle road, very moderate middle road, then I think even more Israeli Palestinians would feel at home as a sizable minority in the country of the Jews.
And do you think it's possible to steer back now to go from what is, either ultra-nationalist Zionism or maybe Messianic Zionism to steer back to something more moderate?
Well, as you know, I'm personally a great critic of the current government of Israel. Some people ask me, why do I do that in the middle of the war? Shouldn't we all be united? And I'm afraid it is a somewhat naive question because Netanyahu is not only fighting the war with Hamas, he's also on a full-blown campaign election. And he and mostly his people, the journalists associated with him, the media influencers, are attacking the center left, right and left. They're attacking the hostages' families for demanding a ceasefire and weakening the national spirit. So the situation is very, very political. And it couldn't be otherwise. This is not a 6-day war. This is already a 4-month war. And it began in a deeply political way. I think that many Israelis have now understood that the different critiques that many of us had against the government came together to enable, not necessarily to cause, but to enable the catastrophe of the 7th of October. It has to do with corruption, because some of the government ministries most crucial to help the victims and the evacuees and the families, some of these ministries did not function for months after the 7th of October. They just didn't pick up the emergency. Instead of that, civil society had to pick up the tab and to care voluntarily, we still do, by the way, for all these hundreds of thousands of people directly impacted. Secondly, of course, nationalism and messianism bring about what I would call delusions of power, because they are based on the idea that a higher power is taking care of us and directing us towards what? Maybe towards reoccupying and resettling the Gaza Strip. So they are working for that. Netanyahu's coalition members, cabinet ministers of the extreme right are working for this cause. Never mind about the hostages, never mind how many soldiers will fall, because there is a higher cause that is directing us to rebuild the coast of Gaza into a Jewish Riviera. This is, I will not mince my words, madness. And this is part of the ministerial parcel that Netanyahu patched up after the last elections. For the first time in his history and in Israel's history, he went only for the extreme right and ultra-Orthodox partners. So there was not a single moderating element in this government. Now we have Gantz, of course, and Eisenkot and Saar, who joined the war cabinet for the emergency period. But there is no responsible adult, no person saying, let's stop, let's ask the radicals to be a bit more quiet. And I'll just add that you saw what happened in The Hague. In the ICJ, in the International Court of Justice, when Israel was put on trial, the interim decision was based on hundreds of what might be interpreted as genocidal talk by officials and non-officials and media influencers, you name it, against Gaza, eradicate Gaza, annihilate Gaza. And this caused us endless international damage. And it's causing you guys damage and every Jewish community in the wide world. Why isn't Netanyahu telling these people to shut up? Why didn't he tell them that from the very beginning? Because he depends on them. Because they are his coalition partners and the only parties who would agree to be his coalition partners nowadays.
So is there a way forward? I know the protests have started again and you have participated in some of them, but
well, first of all, I'm
is there
sorry
a way
about...
that Netanyahu will, cede power or call for new elections?
Yes, there is growing protest. every Saturday evening and midweek occasions too, we go out on the streets and demonstrate. Now, there are two kinds of demonstrations in Israel, but they literally flow into one another, especially in Tel Aviv. First, we march from Habima Theater to the Hostages Square, and this is a march against the government, calling for elections now. Elections now. Let the people decide who will lead us in this very difficult situation. So we are demonstrating for elections now. Let the people decide who are the truly responsible adults for this calamitous time. And then we march all the way to the Hostages Square, what used to be the Tel Aviv Arts Museum Square. And there sit day in, day out, I mean, during midweek too, many family members of the hostages, appealing to parliamentarians, to the government, to Netanyahu, to promote a deal, a ceasefire, and a hostage deal, a hostage return. And many of the marchers for elections now join the hostages' families. What we all share is a deep criticism of the way this crisis was caused and handled by the current regime. So these are tough times because we have to fight more than one war.
I was just wondering, it seems clear what the protests want, but I'm curious if the coalition won't change, will anything change?
No, this coalition wants to stay exactly as is. Nobody wants to go into the opposition. And I will put it in parts. So Netanyahu simply wants to survive and to survive his trial for three cases of corruption. To remain in power, this is one wish, and the other wish, of course, is somehow to evade, to cancel, to stop his trial or to win it. This is one big reason why he started so-called overhauling the judiciary of Israel last January. The ultra-nationalists feel that we are hearing the footsteps of Messiah, Mashiach ben David. And they see the Gaza war, literally see it, they say so, as a sign from heaven. And now we are supposed to go through some kind of an Armageddon, cost what it might, in order to reclaim Gaza and hopefully also the West Bank by making life very, very difficult to the Palestinians of the West Bank. And this, many of the settlers are doing as we speak. So a lot of Israelis who had some kind of a support for the settler movement, some support for the nationalist Zionism, are now far more worried about where these people are going, because they are obviously moving along history on a course different from the rest of us. And then you have the ultra-Orthodox in the government. And the ultra-Orthodox leaders are not interested in the public good in any sense of the Western Republic. I'm a scholar of Republican thought, classical republicanism. And these people are not about the common good. They are still in their minds living in the shtetl with some kind of a Polish count to whom they have to pay homage and get their money and their permissions and their educational autonomy and so on. But the Polish nobleman has disappeared and the state of Israel is here, and still that's the way they see it. So some of the ultra-Orthodox government members have been not only saying unbelievable things, such as, oh, in the government everything is fine, said Minister Goldknopf the other day. There is no connection. Why should there be a connection between the war and the government? Now, of course, these people's children, the vast majority of them, there are some exceptions, are not in uniform. They are not fighting and getting killed in Gaza. They're not on the Lebanon border. Very few of their communities have suffered in the 7th of October massacre. And there is an absence of empathy and solidarity that should have been coming from those communities to mainstream Israel. And this absence is biting so deep, and the sense of inequality and injustice between the ultra-Orthodox and all the others. By the way, it's not only the secular, the national religious are also fighting in Gaza and paying taxes and working and part of the general mainstream. So the abyss is growing so deep that I think that once the tsunami of protest, we'll talk about it in a minute, erupts, the ultra-Orthodox would be a target, not, God forbid, physical, but a target for unprecedented anger. And as I've just suggested, the tsunami of anger will erupt.
To go back to our Zionist conversation, because I know that's what we're supposed to be talking about. All the things that you just mentioned that you feel that the government is doing, I think that's what people associate Zionism with now, with ultranationalist points of view. So I was curious if you think the term is still useful and why you think the term is still useful, or it's something even those who support a Jewish state, could move away from.
Yes, well, we are not going anywhere, neither as Israelis, nor I think as Zionists. As I said before, I and people like myself are hoping to claim from this vague definition of Zionism, our own kind of Zionism, which is humanist, which is liberal democrat, which is based on solidarity and justice and the rule of law. And Zionism is not going away, not only because of the ultranationalists. It is not going away because the best of Israeli civil society that you have seen, I hope, on your screens or when visiting or read about, that showed its true strength after the 7th of October, is also Zionism. This is, for me, the mainstream Zionism. And the youth movements, both of my sons were educated in a youth movement, Dror Habonim, and one of them stayed on also for a few years as an adult. They've done so many wonderful things within Israeli society, and now they were the ones presenting themselves as volunteers right away. They helped, they educated, they worked with children and teenagers and young people. They are doing wonderful things. This kind of civil society, and of course the NGOs and the urban scene of Tel Aviv, which has put so much of its heart into helping and sympathizing with the people who got hurt. And of course, Tel Aviv itself was bleeding on the 7th of October because the Nova Festival, which was the single place most badly hit, there were 364 people murdered in the Nova Festival alone. And this is Tel Aviv. They were not all from Tel Aviv, but this is the spirit of Tel Aviv. These are the musicians and the people and the vibe of Tel Aviv. Sometimes I can't help feeling that, my kind of Israel was hit badly on the 7th of October, but not Netanyahu's kind of Israel, and not his coalition members' Israel. So yes, going back to Zionism, we are reclaiming Zionism in what we do as a society, in the solidarity, the volunteering, the organizations, the demonstrations, and the protests. It's all the same widening current in Israeli society. And many people who were sitting on the fence, I think, will join us. This doesn't mean moderation towards the Palestinians at this point. We have to say that. We don't have an open road, an open vista right now to renewing a peace process. Maybe just a painful, long negotiation for a territorial agreement. I don't use the word peace right now with the Palestinians. But this mainstream moderate civil society of ours, which is quite hawkish, not so moderate about the Hamas certainly and about the Palestinian leadership, is about retuning Israel back to the lines of liberal democracy and social justice. So this Zionism is worth keeping, and the word itself in my mind is worth keeping. When I say I'm a Zionist, I write it with a small Z rather than a capital Z.
Um, I listened to a speech of yours. I think you gave at a Haifa protest last week, and you said something about how moderate Zionists are also, a stiff-necked people, which, has a biblical reference that it's not just, nationalists who can be stubborn and obstinate and fight for what they want, but, moderates can do that too.
Yes, well, part of my reclaiming, and I also, as people know, reclaim my Jewish heritage as a secular and a liberal. Part of this reclaiming, we wrote a book about it called Jews and Words. The reclaiming is also some of the oldest Jewish concepts, such as irreverent sense of humor. This is also a very Jewish secular trait, but also the toughness. Because we too are grandchildren of the shtetl as it held for 1,000 years amid a hostile environment. And we too believe in what we are and what we do. And as they say in Israel, there is no form of living in the form of life in the universe which is tougher than a kibbutz grandmother. My mom happens to be a kibbutz grandmother, and I will at some point be a kibbutznik grandmother too, because we remain kibbutzniks even after we leave it. We are tough people, Sarah. We are not running away.
Mm.
Some people are packing and going, but the vast majority of my friends are here to fight the three wars. And I repeat the three wars: the wars against Hamas, the political battle against Netanyahu and his coalition, and the war we all have to fight against global anti-Semitism these days, also our war. So it takes some toughness, doesn't it?
Is there something that you wish the international community understood about Zionism or understood about the, Israeli moderate left right now that you think they're not understanding?
Well, a lot of people in the world don't even know that there is a moderate left in Israel, and they don't know what it stands for. Sometimes they think that we stand for peace with Hamas. Of course, we don't stand for peace with Hamas. Sometimes they think that we are pacifists. Well, we are peaceniks, but we are not pacifists. That's an important distinction. So yes, a lot of people need to hear this voice. And this is why I am so grateful to Moment magazine for giving me a stage from which I can sound my voice. And you're also very welcome to join my Twitter war room, which is very, very active, as you know, Sarah, because I try to reach out not to the usual suspects, but to ordinary people who are baffled and sad and angry about what's going on in Gaza, but who do not think that Israel is a monster. These are the people I need to talk to and to say, look, there is an opposition, a very strong opposition to Netanyahu, and we have a voice too. So yes, this is what I've been manifesting around the world as much as I can, and especially during the last months.
I wanted to talk about your Twitter or X account. You've become a very, very active user, and most people, I think, don't want to jump into the fray of Twitter, but you seem to really engage with it and speak to people who are unexpected. So I'm curious why. What makes you want to do that?
Well, because I'm an adventurer. I'm an academic. I could have stayed within the academic world, which is even now quite protected, at least in the Israeli campuses, if not in the American campuses. I could have stayed in the usual media round of television and opinion pieces, which I've been doing all the time. But I wanted to reach deeper, also within Israeli society. So for years, I've been using my Twitter account to talk to Israelis who are not my kind of Israelis, who come from the so-called other sides. I made some very good human contacts with ultra-Orthodox people through X, through what used to be called Twitter. And I've got a lot of right-wing Israeli followers with whom, we fight all the time. But those who are hard-necked are sticking around, and we keep talking. And now with the world, I've moved into posting almost only in English. And what I find is that there is quite a big public of middle of the road people, whether they are liberals or conservatives, in the various countries of Europe and Latin America, and of course, North America, and a few from East Asia, very interesting people, who need to hear this Israeli voice, which is proudly Zionist, and I remind them time and again, which is humanist, that is also following some of the global values of human rights, who is able to sympathize up to a point with the innocents in Gaza and the Palestinians of the West Bank, up to a point, because not every civilian in Gaza, as we know, is innocent. But yes, with the innocents. And which offers an alternative to the Netanyahu government and to the kind of Israel that it portrays in the world. So, you know, jumping from 12,000 to 26,000 followers since the 7th of October, I wish it hadn't happened, you know. This is not the way I wanted to see my voice touring the world, but I have to make this voice. I take it as a civic duty, not just to Israel, but to people who are not willing to be pro-Palestinian in a simplistic way, or who don't want, as my father used to say, I'm not pro-Israeli, I'm not pro-Palestinian, I'm pro-peace. And there are a lot of such people. So we have a lot of quiet potential friends out there, and a social platform like X, maybe it's the only one in which it's possible to reach out to them, to engage them, to talk to them, to argue with them, and to keep them in sight. And they stay keeping me in sight. So I'll not tell you about the trolls and the swear words and so on. Everybody knows that. But those of you who are brave enough are welcome to follow me, Fania Oz, on Twitter and see what's going on.
And I think seeing how much, your popularity on Twitter also goes with the popularity of the column you wrote for Moment. I didn't mention before that I think it's been the most shared, most visited column we've ever had. It's been translated into over 4 languages, I think now. So your message seems to be hitting something that people feel they need or they want. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about why that is.
Well, a lot of people have a memory of an Israel that they loved, of a Zionism that they could live with. So many people who reach out to me were volunteers in kibbutzim in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and have such wonderful memories. And more than once, people have written to me, you represent my kind of Israel. Now, I don't want this to sound elitist. We have learned our lesson. This is not about the old Ashkenazi kibbutznik Israel. That's not coming back, not the way it was. But there is a new Israel, which is about solidarity across lines of Edah, of ethnic or group of origin, lines of religious and secular, lines of conservative and liberal. And this solidarity is something that we are now treasuring. Unfortunately, the nationalists have let go of the solidarity game. They tried once, but not anymore. Now they pinpoint us as enemies. And there also are enemies, I have enemies, I have political enemies. But the majority of Israeli society is ripe for something new, more quiet, more thoughtful, more adult, and less disruptive than the talk style, the public speech style that Netanyahu has introduced over 20 years ago. We need to get back to a better place, to a better conversation. And this kind of Israel can emerge the day after the war is over and hopefully the government is over.
When you spoke with Amy Schwartz, our opinion editor, last time in November, you talked a little bit about how there were moral red lines in war that if they were crossed, would make you and your circle rethink the war. And I'm curious if, you think lines have been crossed now, and if that's changed your opinion in any way.
Yes, well, I began with saying that the war on Hamas is necessary. Because for me, for many of us, for most of us, defeating Hamas is a top priority duty, along a second top priority duty, which is to return the hostages. We owe that to our civil society, to return the hostages. There is a big argument about that in Israel now. But almost everyone agrees about defeating Hamas. So yes, a war had to be fought. Whether this war is being fought, has been fought, exactly along the moral ideals that I have. You know, I was a soldier in the Israeli army, a soldier and an officer for 2 years, long ago. I was educated in the values of the Israeli army. I don't think that all those values are being kept in this terrible war. I think that Israel is probably conducting some war crimes, even by its own standards, and we have legal standards, and we have military juries, so are working on it all the time, even during the battlefield, the actual war. I think we have crossed some lines. As I wrote somewhere, I have no other army to protect me. This is my army. These are the kids of my friends and of my neighbors and my own kids and the friends of my children who are in uniform and fighting now. I can hope and pray and tell them and raise my own kids and their friends and my students in a way that will make sure that they will not commit war crimes. But war is a rule breaker by definition, which I find very, very sad. Should the war be stopped at this point? And of course, we have to mention, it goes without saying, that we are fighting an enemy which does not adhere to any sort of rules of engagement, of international law, of the laws of war. Utterly none. So Israel, to use my juridical partner and colleague's language, Israel had an excellent right to enter the war, jus ad bellum in Latin. It is not always following, I think, all the moral rules of engaging in war as in jus in bello. And to put it not in Latin, a lot of innocent Palestinians are getting killed, a lot of children. I don't know how many. I don't know what the numbers coming from the Gaza Ministry of Health actually mean, but far too many. Now we have the other first priority goal, to release the hostages. And despite the fact that the IDF managed to rescue 2 of them the other day in a heroic operation, I still think, we still think, and the vast majority of the families of the hostages think, that ceasefire and a very painful agreement will have to be made. Very painful because we will have to release a couple hundred heavy murderers. I'm saying couple hundred because we're supposed to release 5,000, 4,000 terrorists currently imprisoned in Israel, but many of them are on very, very low key. They are associated with terror organizations, but low key. I think some of them shouldn't have been jailed at all. But we're talking about 300 or 400 hardcore killers, and families of the people who killed will see the murderer walk free and celebrate. This is not easy, and of course it is very dangerous for the future unless it's part of a larger agreement, which it will have to be. Unless it's part of a truce, which it will have to be. But first, release the hostages. You know, Hamas can be defeated another day, but hostages don't have many days left.
Yeah, no, that's true. I know you've been editing survivor testimony since October 7th. What has that been like, and what have you learned from that?
Yes, well, you know, one of the things that happened immediately after 7th of October was that there was so much testimony and footage and recordings of heartbreaking situations, of horrific situations. And of course, the government hasn't touched these pieces of evidence to this day. Nobody's, I think now the Heritage Ministry is beginning to collect some stuff. But once again, civil society walked in. So not all the kibbutzim have started to document their accounts, their memories of that day. Some kibbutzim are simply too hard hit. I talked to a friend from Be'eri the other day. I have a close friend in Be'eri. And he said, no, we haven't started recording or telling yet. It's too early. But the kibbutz that we are working with has disciples less hit. That is, only 18 people were killed, 5 agricultural workers from Thailand, and 12 kibbutz members, and 1 was taken hostage. So there was enough of the community of the survivors to begin talking about this right away. Shouldn't we record all our stories of this day? And a wonderful group of volunteers stepped in. There is a connection through the reservists of the Israeli Navy. Some of the Navy reservists came to help, and I was brought in too. And other people have interviewed each and every survivor from that kibbutz. I think 99% have been interviewed. It was transcribed, and we edited very, very lightly, very gently. I didn't change their words. I didn't change their impressions. But you see that people are still shell-shocked when they speak to the recording device. So sometimes you have to undo some shell-shocked sentences when they talk about what happened that morning or that afternoon, how they held the door. One of them was in the kibbutz guard. He was fighting. He was outside fighting, and he found some of the murdered people. And then last week they took us there. And everything that I edited, and each family's house, all these stories that I read, suddenly I saw it in front of me, including about 10 houses that were invaded and bombed and burned down, and people died in them. It's a very hard physical experience, very hard. But I'm glad that we've almost completed now the recording and editing of all their evidence. It is very fresh, it is very raw. And for the first time as a historian, I've helped to create a primary source. It will be a primary source for historians and other people for a long time to come.
Oh, I want to make sure we get to questions too. One question that some people has come up a few times is how do you respond to the I don't know if it's an accusation, but the idea of Zionism is colonialism?
Well, I dedicated a little bit of my article with you, the Zionism article, to this, and I've been teaching Israel studies for years in various countries. And I am among the historians, not all historians, not all Israeli historians are in this view, that Zionism is structurally very different from colonialism. My 4 grandparents, who all came in the 1930s, already sniffing the rise of the Nazis and the rise of anti-Semitism, from what is today parts of the Ukraine, different parts of the Ukraine. They did not come as emissaries of a European power. They did not come backed by an army and a navy like every other colonialist project. They did not come to a land that was totally disconnected from their own national history in order to turn a buck, in order to become economically successful, in order to use and abuse the resources of that land. In all these criteria, Zionism is not colonialism. There was a movement of people from Europe into this part of the Middle East. They looked different, we looked different, but we were increasingly joined, of course, by our sisters and brothers from the Mizrahi Jews, the Sephardi Jews, many of whom came from the heartland of Arab countries and lands. And most of us came because we had no other choice. So for me, our past, the Jewish, what my father and I have called the Jewish text line. Ours, we wrote, ours is not a bloodline, but a text line. Brought us there. We belong, but the life raft argument is still the best. This was the only life raft of my 4 grandparents. Not colonialism, but an escape of refugees to the only place they could go. But we should move on to more questions.
In this version of humanist Zionism, where does God or religion fit into it?
There is a lot of respect. By the way, not all seculars respect God and religion now, because for us in Israel, they've been tied for so long with very, very orthodox and very extremists currents looking down on us seculars. So we've paved our own way. The book I mentioned before, Jews and Words, was a kind of a subtle, nuanced manifesto of being a secular and still very Jewish, textually very Jewish. So God it can be accommodated, obviously. I mean, I've got fellow humanist Zionists who are religious Zionists. They're not all fanatic nationalists, of course not. Certainly not in other Jewish communities outside Israel. But God does not belong as a political entity telling us what to do, where to invade, what to teach in our schools. He's not that kind of a personality in our world. And I think that there is a good alliance between moderate religious Jews, liberal religious, moderate Orthodox, you name it, and seculars like myself who hold on to their Jewish identity and tradition. We can work together. We can ally.
That leads to another question about working together in terms of how do you envision a possible future with a Palestinian state? Do you see a two-state solution in the future, or someone else had suggested the confederation option?
Yes, well, I think what is dead after the 7th of October looks very dead is not the two-state solution. It's the one-state solution. We will not be living in one state with the citizens of Gaza in the foreseeable generation or 2 or 3. This is not going to be one state, unless it is one state of the Jewish fanatics who say we'll drive out all the Arabs, but I'm not even talking about that. Yes, Israel now has 20%, about 2 million Arab Palestinian citizens, not only Palestinians, also Druze and other minorities. But I don't see the residents of the West Bank and Gaza joining this one happy family, because it is not going to happen from both sides, by the way. So the option for me is a two-state solution. I'm not even, as I said before, I'm not talking about peace now. I'm talking about a loveless, pragmatic, tough-spirited separation, territorial agreement. Maybe along the green lines, maybe a little more creatively along the green lines, putting some of the Jewish settlements in. There are several options. This can still work, I say, as a very loveless agreement, what my father used to call a divorce. We need to divorce. Now, the confederation, again, I'm very open to any creative solution, including a confederation. But for this, you already need a level of trust and cooperation, which right now doesn't seem to be on the horizon. But anything that dawns on the horizon, I will follow pragmatically, cautiously, not gullibly, but any future opening, including what President Biden is talking about, is worth checking out. The alternative is too horrid to reflect upon.
You'd alluded to the differences in Zionism between Herzl and Ben Gurion. There's a question about what are the differences in their views of Zionism?
Well, Ben Gurion came from East Europe, Herzl from Budapest and Vienna. They were very different gentlemen in many ways. They didn't meet, of course, they belonged to different generations, but had they met, I'm not sure they would have liked one another. Herzl is bourgeois, liberal, middle of the road, very European. He did not forecast the rise of the Hebrew language and the Hebrew culture. Ben Gurion is a child of the socialist Zionism, of the Hebrew, the new Hebrew culture, of the kibbutz culture, of the old labor. But both of them were very decisive men when it came to the kind of state they envisaged. And it is important to note that both of them adamantly took the Arabs living in the land to be part of the future civil society and liberal democracy. Both of them were aware of violent options or of bribery, of the options of buying them off the land and so on. And both of them rejected that in favor of the formula that they would both agree to, and I will restate it, of a state of the Jews and all its citizens, a state of the Jews and a liberal democracy. Ben Gurion was a very tough nut, and once there was outright fighting, of course, he fought and he won, and he was all for conquering more territory for the Jews compared to the original United Nations plan. But that was only after war was started in November 1947 by the Palestinians, by the Palestinian leadership, not yet called Palestinians, joined by 5 invading Arab armies. So Ben Gurion is a bit like the old Zionist left, from which I also hail, very tough about security, about our right to defend ourselves, about the right to secure borders, and still very democratic and willing to accept what the Declaration of Independence says, which is equality to Arab Israelis and a hand of peace to neighboring Arabs. And the Ben Gurionite, among others, Declaration of Independence is the best document that we, my kind of Israel, has for promoting what we are hoping for the future.
Connected to this, two different people asked what would happen if Israel became a majority Arab state, or if Arabs, Israelis had more power in the government.
Well, I'll start from the end. I would like Arab Israelis to have more power in the government. We had a very good, all too short, unfortunately, coalition when Netanyahu was temporarily ousted in 2021, with Bennett, Lapid, and the unexpected Mansour Abbas of the Islamist Party, who may be an Islamist, but he's a pragmatist. I would like to see him in the government again. I would like to see more Arab ministers in the government. The question of an Arab majority is different, and this is what we are trying to say to our right-wing rivals. If we take over more Arab population than we already have, for example, in a one-sided takeover of the West Bank, or God forbid, of Gaza, and we have to give these people full citizenship because otherwise Israel is not worth existing. It has to be a democracy. But then what? There is no single country in the world that has an Arab majority and is a democracy. I'm not saying Muslim, I'm saying Arab. Not a single country in the world. If Israel has an Arab majority, it will no longer be the nation state of the Jews, and rightly so. The majority will decide otherwise. So that's one reason why people like me and my circle and about half, just under half of the Israeli constituency have been driving for the two-state solution in order to remain a Jewish majority for generations to come and a democracy for generations to come. That's the deep rationale of the two-state solution from our viewpoint, apart from partial justice also to the Palestinians.
I think we have time for one more question. And a few people asked about anti-Semitism. Were you surprised by the upswing of anti-Semitism around the world? And you had mentioned, if you had to leave Israel, is there a place you would go that you would feel safe as a Jew today?
We saw it coming, of course, because even on the 7th of October itself, before Israel had the chance to shoot a single missile to Gaza, there were already anti-Israeli voices, rhetoric rampant. They got what they deserve, the settlers, and so on. And of course, I knew, because we've had previous rounds of fights in Gaza, that whenever we shoot, and unfortunately we kill not just combatants, there would be an anti-Israeli wave. But this is the greatest I've seen in my lifetime. I don't think that any of us expected the sheer size and the vitriol and viciousness of the anti-Israel wave, alongside, let me emphasize, alongside totally legitimate criticism. I also have criticism. But no, the Israel hate, the anti-Israelism, now openly arm in arm with anti-Semitism. What we said about the word Zionist, that it covers up for the word Jew, and sometimes they don't bother to say Zionist anymore, they just say Jew. So yes, we can see it coming. We could see it coming, but we could not estimate the size. I think people are asking me, where would I go if, God forbid, Israel, my Israel, collapsed? I have an opposite expectation that quite a few Jewish people from the world will come to live in Israel. And yes, out of dire necessity, but Israel was founded by people who came out of dire necessity. It's not new. It wasn't a holiday destination to begin with. And I would welcome these people with open arms. But I will also give you the dystopia. I mean, this is a somewhat utopic idea. I think it will happen, by the way, that our population will grow, our Jewish population will grow, and that the people flocking in would be moderate and help us to steer Israel towards moderation and eventually towards an agreement with the Palestinians. I do have some optimism about that. The dystopic option, where will I go? Well, Eli and I have been looking at places just by way of exercise, and I have no idea which place is safe and cozy and friendly to Israelis in the whole wide world these days, with the possible exception of the Upper West Side. But I can't afford the Upper West Side.
Right. And even there you see, fights breaking out and things happening. Well, thank you very much, Fania. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else did too.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to all of you who showed up and asked good questions. And as I tell my students, if I could, I would personally hug each and every one of you these times. So until the next time, next opportunity.
Great. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Late out.